After high school, I felt pretty lost. I didn't have the grades for college, and to be honest, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. My uncle, who had been a firefighter for 20 years, suggested I look into emergency services. At first, I found the idea funny, but as time passed, it started to make sense. I had always been good at staying calm in stressful situations, and I really liked helping people. So, at 19, I started training for dispatch. It wasn't easy, but I enjoyed it. Learning all the different emergency codes, how to talk people through crises, and coordinating with other services, it was challenging, but rewarding. A year later, I was working full-time at our local dispatch center. Now let me tell you about a day that really tested my patience. It started off chaotic. We were short-staffed, and it seemed like every call that came in was some major emergency. I was juggling multiple units trying to keep everything running smoothly when I received a call from someone familiar. It was a guy we all knew in town. Let's call him the town drunk. He was demanding a ride to the store, his voice slurred with impatience. He clearly expected someone to come and pick him up right away. I had explained to him multiple times before that we were into taxi service, and I told him again that if he needed transportation, calling a cab would be his best bet. It would be cheaper too, but he wasn't having it. He claimed he had seen us give free rides and accused me of lying. I calmly reminded him that the rides he had seen were for medical emergencies or prearranged non-emergency transports. They couldn't just be requested on the spot. Still, he persisted, growing angrier and more belligerent. He started throwing insults, demanding a ride immediately. I had to tell him that it wasn't possible, not with how busy we were with real emergencies. If he really needed to get to the store, I advised him once again to call a taxi. With frustration dripping from his words, he muttered something about calling emergency services and making it sound like a real emergency so we would have no choice but to come. I warned him that making false emergency calls was illegal, but he brushed me off, telling me he didn't care. He hung up, and just a few minutes later, I got a call from the emergency hotline. They told me there was a report of alcohol poisoning at a specific address. The address sounded familiar. It was the town drunk's place. I quickly told them to be cautious, explaining that this individual was known to be aggressive and had a history of making false reports. I suggested that police backup should accompany the team. The emergency operator agreed, and the intervention team was notified. I sent one of our units to the scene, hoping the situation wouldn't get out of hand. About 10 minutes later, I received a radio update from the paramedics I had sent. They sounded confused and told me that the patient was being arrested instead of treated. They mentioned how the man had tried to force his way into the ambulance, demanding a ride to the store. When the police tried to calm him down, he had lashed out and even taken a swing at one of the officers, leading to his restraint. I asked for a status update on the man's condition. The paramedic told me he had some bruises from resisting arrest, and he was clearly intoxicated. They were planning to take him to the hospital to get checked out, and most likely, he'd be starting detox soon. The guy had actually called emergency services just to try and get a free ride to the store, and now he was facing serious charges for assaulting a police officer. In the following weeks, I heard that the town drunk had been in the hospital for a while. His scuffle with the police had left him with a few broken bones, and they were finally addressing his alcohol addiction. He was facing some pretty serious charges, but the judge decided to suspend his sentence if he completed a rehab program and did community service. Part of me felt bad for him. Addiction is a terrible thing to deal with, but another part of me hoped that this experience would be the wake-up call he needed. Maybe now he would get the help he had been needing for so long. My dad would always show me the value of maintaining our home and yard. Weekends were spent watching him tinker with our old lawnmower, and he'd explain how to change the oil and sharpen the blades. Over time, I began taking on more responsibilities, mowing our lawn and helping out neighbors with their yard work to earn some extra cash. When I moved into my first house with my wife, I was eager to have my own yard to take care of. The previous owners had left behind an ancient mower that barely worked. For the first year, I managed to keep it running, but it was clear I needed an upgrade. One Saturday morning, I decided it was time to buy a new mower. I headed to the local hardware store, determined to find a good deal. As I walked in, I immediately noticed a floor model on clearance. It seemed like perfect timing. I approached a sales associate to inquire about the mower, asking if it was still available. The associate confirmed it was and mentioned that it was the display model, meaning they could offer a significant discount. I thought that was fantastic, but pointed out that I hadn't brought my truck. The sales associate reassured me that they could hold it for me at customer service until I was able to come back and pick it up. After paying for the mower, I went home to grab my truck and returned to the store about 30 minutes later. At customer service, I mentioned I was there to pick up the lawn mower I had purchased. The customer service rep confirmed my purchase and went to retrieve it. They helped me load it into my truck, and I left, feeling pretty satisfied with my purchase. For the rest of the weekend, I happily mowed my lawn. feeling proud of my new mower. 2 weeks later, however, I received an unexpected call from the hardware store. The person on the line told me that my lawnmower was ready for pickup. Confused, I explained that I had already picked up the mower 2 weeks earlier. The store employee checked their records and apologized for the confusion, assuring me they would update their records. Thinking that was it, I was surprised when they called again the following week with the same message. Once more, I explained that I had already picked up my mower. This continued for 3 weeks straight, and I was beginning to get frustrated. After the third call, I vented to my wife about the situation, telling her that the hardware store had called again about the same non-existent mower order. She found it ridiculous and asked what I planned to do about it. I joked that if they called one more time, I would go and pick up my mower. She laughed, doubting that they would actually give me a free mower. But I was determined. When the fourth week rolled around, sure enough, my phone rang again with the same message from the store. This time, I decided to play along. I responded with an apology, explaining that I had been called out of town for work and had just returned. I pretended to have misplaced my receipt and asked if that would be a problem. The store employee reassured me that it wasn't an issue, as the mower was already paid in full, and all I needed was a photo ID matching the name on the order. I called my wife to share the news, excitedly telling her that I was on my way to pick up a new mower. She laughed, still skeptical that they actually had another mower for me. When I arrived at the store, I walked up to the customer service desk and casually mentioned that I was there to pick up my lawnmower. After checking my ID against their records, the customer service rep confirmed everything and said they'd bring the mower out shortly. To my amazement, a few minutes later, an employee appeared with a forklift carrying a brand new boxed lawnmower. They loaded it into my truck without any hesitation. I now had two perfectly good lawnmowers, the original floor model I had purchased and this brand new one that had come my way due to the store's repeated mistake. I briefly considered returning the original mower, but I worried that it might raise suspicions. Selling it online crossed my mind, but then I thought of a better idea. My best friend had recently helped me move into my new house, putting in countless hours of work. He had mentioned needing a new mower himself, so I decided to give him the original one as a thank you gift. I ended up with a brand new mower at a huge discount, and my friend got a free mower out of the deal. While I hadn't intended to take advantage of the store's error, I figured after trying so hard to correct the mistake, I had earned this unexpected windfall. Persistence really does pay off, even when you're just trying to do the right thing. It all began when my usually docile cat, Whiskers, decided to unleash his inner tiger on my hand. I had been trying to give him his monthly flea treatment, but he wasn't in the mood. One moment I was holding him, and the next, his teeth sank into my hand like I was some kind of gourmet mouse. At first, I didn't think much of it. I cleaned the wound, put a band-aid on, and continued with my day. However, by the evening, my hand had swollen to twice its size, and angry red streaks started creeping up my arm. That's when I knew I was in trouble. So there I was at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dragging myself to the emergency room. The waiting room was packed, full of people in various states of discomfort. I signed in, glad that my non-writing hand was the injured one, and settled in for what I knew would be a long wait. After about an hour of mindlessly scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore the throbbing pain in my hand, a nurse finally called my name. She led me into a small room and set up an antibiotic IV drip. The cool liquid entering my veins brought some relief, and for the first time that day, I relaxed. Once the IV finished, the nurse explained that I should press the call button to notify the doctor when I was ready for the next steps. I followed her instructions and waited patiently. After 15 minutes, the door opened, and a doctor looking rushed entered. Without much delay, he explained that they were expecting an ambulance and needed the room I was in. He quickly disconnected the IV line, leaving the needle in my arm, and guided me out of the room. We walked down a crowded hallway into another room where two patients were already present. He found a chair for me and placed it in the corner, mentioning that someone would come soon to remove the IV. When I settled into the chair, I noticed an elderly man peacefully dozing off on one bed and a middle-aged woman in the other, fidgeting with impatience. Moments after the doctor left, the woman's irritation began to spill out. She seemed to grow increasingly frustrated, yelling about how long she'd been waiting. Her complaints became louder, but I tried my best to ignore them, focusing on my throbbing hand. She continued, her annoyance escalating as she repeatedly pressed the call button. When a tinny voice responded over the intercom asking how they could assist her, she launched into a tirade, accusing the hospital staff of poor service and claiming she had been neglected. The voice from the intercom reassured her, asking for patience, but this only seemed to make her angrier. She began ripping off the wires attached to her body, and to my horror, she pulled out her IV, causing a spurt of blood to stain the bedsheets. Without a second thought, she stormed out of the room, her face red with fury. I sat there in stunned silence along with the elderly man. I could hear commotion in the hallway, followed by some shouting, though I couldn't make out the words. The doctor eventually returned, seemingly unfazed by the chaos, and calmly removed the IV from my arm. When he worked on my discharge papers, I asked about the woman who had stormed out. He sighed and mentioned that this wasn't the first time they had dealt with a patient behaving like that, adding that she could be arrested for disorderly conduct or even assault if she lashed out at the staff. As I left the ER, I saw the woman being escorted to a police car, still yelling angrily while two officers guided her to the back seat. One of the officers spoke to her and told her to calm down as they would be taking her to the station. She continued to protest, demanding to speak to the hospital administrator and accusing everyone of treating her unfairly. And while I was glad that her entitled behavior was being handled, I felt sorry for someone who was clearly having a terrible day. A nurse approached me as I stood outside, asking if I was all right and if I had witnessed what had happened. I confirmed that I had been in the room when the woman left, and the nurse shook her head, commenting that it was a shame some people didn't understand how triage works in an emergency room. I nodded in agreement, grateful for the hard-working staff who had taken care of me despite the overwhelming environment. As I walked to my car, hand-bandaged, and with a prescription for antibiotics in my pocket, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things could have gone if I had let frustration get the best of me. And while I hope I never have to visit the ER again, at least I now have a story about the night an entitled patient learned that hospitals aren't hotels, and that sometimes the customer is always right doesn't apply when dealing with life and death situations. I worked in a small cafe in town for over a year. Every shift was more or less the same, taking coffee orders, cleaning tables, and dealing with customers. It wasn't the hardest job, but it could definitely get stressful during the rush hours. And like in most hospitality jobs, everyone was expected to pitch in and work as a team. Well, almost everyone. There was this one girl who always seemed to think her job was just to stand around and look pretty. You know the type, blonde, always glued to her phone and barely lifting a finger unless it was to hand a customer their coffee. She got the cushiest assignments too, like standing behind the bar or chatting with customers, while the rest of us did the real work. She never did any of the dirty tasks. Not once did I see her wipe down a table, mop the floors, or clean the toilets. All that work was left to me and the others. The worst part was that our boss didn't seem to care at all. He was too busy flirting with her and coming up with excuses for why she didn't need to do her share. I had a feeling she was hired more for her looks than her ability to actually do the job. One day, after yet another exhausting shift where I was left to clean and close down the cafe while she sat in the corner texting, I had finally had enough. I went to the boss and calmly pointed out how unfair it was that I was doing all the cleaning while she never helped out. He just nodded and pretended to listen, telling me he'd talk to her about it. But, of course, nothing changed. The next day, it was the same old routine. She showed up, barely did any work, collected her pay, and left early, while I was left scrubbing floors, packing away chairs, and emptying the trash bins by myself. Then came the moment that nearly made my blood boil. It was a busy day, and we were both supposed to stay late to clean and close the cafe. I was exhausted from dealing with the morning and lunch rush, but as usual, she was still stuck to her phone. Right when it was time to start cleaning up, she walked over, holding her coffee bin full of used grinds. Without even looking up from her phone, she casually shoved the bin toward me, expecting me to empty it for her, as if she hadn't been sitting around all day. I was holding a pile of dirty dishes at that moment, and I couldn't believe her nerve. She just stood there tapping away on her phone, waiting for me to deal with her mess. That was it. I was done. The next day, I arrived at the cafe earlier than her and decided it was time for some payback. I grabbed a fresh trash bag for her coffee bin, but before putting it in, I poked a few holes in the bottom. The morning went as usual, her texting, me working, but this time I wasn't stressing. I knew what was coming. For the first time, I decided to be just as lazy as she was. I left everything out and didn't bother cleaning up spills. I let juice dry sticky on the counters, didn't refill the cake display, left coffee grind all over the floor, and ignored the milk splatter around the milkshake machine. By the time the afternoon hit, the place was a mess. About 45 minutes before closing, I went into the back office and put on my best "I'm not feeling well" face. I told the boss I had some lady issues and needed to leave early. I rarely took sick days and always stayed late, so he didn't question me at all. He just told me to go ahead and take care of myself, probably out of guilt for all the extra work he knew I'd been doing. I slipped out the back without saying a word to her, leaving her alone with the chaos. The next day, I showed up early again, eager to see how things played out. Apparently, she hadn't noticed the holes I made in the trash bag. When she went to pull it out at the end of her shift, all the filthy coffee grinds, watery black sludge, and whatever else was in there poured all over her shoes and onto the floor she had just mopped. To make things worse for her, the cafe was a complete disaster since I hadn't bothered cleaning up properly the entire day. She had to spend nearly 2 hours cleaning and packing everything down by herself. Word got back to me that by the time she finished, she was drenched in sweat and muttering about how disgusting everything was. She even tried to complain to the boss the next day, saying that I had left her with all the work, but the boss wasn't having it. He reminded her that she'd been leaving me to do all the cleaning for months, and I always managed to finish much faster than she did. After that, the boss finally started making her do her share of the work whenever we were on the same shift. She clearly hated it. The look she shot my way said it all. Pure resentment. But I wasn't bothered. After months of doing her work for her, it felt good to see her finally having to pull her own weight. Eventually, she couldn't handle it and quit. I heard she moved on to some other cafe down the street. I didn't care where she went as long as she was gone. It was sweet justice. After months of slacking off and letting others carry her weight, she finally got what she deserved.